Hello and welcome back to another episode of On the Grid Podcast, Season 5, Episode 3. Today, we are looking at the 2025 season and looking ahead because we are still about about 2-ish months away from it all kicking off and all things happening on track, and about a month away until we actually see the car launches in the live event, the 75th anniversary of F1, F1 Live, happening at the O2 Arena in London. But that is happening in the future. Let's talk about the now, and let's look at the 2025 F1 Driver Pairings. So I'm your host, Adrian, as per usual. Joining me, as ever, is my fantastic co-host, my right-hand man, Ethan Evans. Ethan, are you a little bit bored? I know we're obviously pre-recording a few episodes and trying to keep ourselves entertained, but it's slowly starting to run out of ideas because it's still a long way to go before we actually get any track action.
Yeah, we still got over a month until we actually see cars on track again. So finding a few topics is a little bit of a challenge at this point. But no, we'll keep going, and 26th of Feb is when the preseason testing starts. So we'll be looking forward to that.
Yeah, of course, preseason testing, the car launches are probably what most F1 fans are looking forward to. So about a month. And then obviously the first race of the season begins in Australia in March, early March. So let's kind of begin and kind of look through and rank our F1 driver pairings. We'll go from 10 to 1 because I think it's obviously a better note to start from the back than the front. So obviously let's unveil all the driver pairings. So well, I'll start in constructor championship order from 2024. So in obviously McLaren finished first, and they've got Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri at the helm. Ferrari finished second, so they've gone with a driver pairing of Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. In third place was Red Bull, and they've obviously axed Sergio Perez from their driver pairing. So they've got Max Verstappen and Liam Lawson. In fourth, jumping into the Mercedes seat is Kimi Antonelli for the departing Lewis Hamilton, and he pairs up with George Russell. In fifth, not a change at Aston Martin, it's Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. In sixth was Alpine, and they've got Pierre Gasly and Jack Doohan, who steps into the departing Esteban Ocon's place, who joined up seventh place Haas, and he's joined by Ollie Behrman, another rookie. In eighth was RB, and they've got another rookie in their driver pairing. Obviously, it's not Yuki Tsunoda, but it is Isaac Hadjar, who steps up into Formula One. In ninth is a very exciting pairing of Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz, who joins the Williams team after, obviously, the shock move of Lewis Hamilton joining Ferrari. So he had to find a seat somewhere, and Williams have fulfilled that seat for him. And then in 10th is, I think it's another exciting partnership because you've got Gabriel Bortoleto, who is yet another rookie, F2 champion from 2024. He's going to bring a lot of excitement, and he's paired up with Nico Hulkenberg. Obviously, that grid is that those constructors are 1 to 10 from last season. It's obviously likely not going to finish like that. There's going to be many twists and turns along the way. But I'll kick things off with my 10th place on my driver pairing. Maybe a bit of a surprise here, but I've actually gone for Yuki Tsunoda and Isaac Hadjar as 10th. I see myself. Obviously, there's between 10th and 9th. I don't see much of a difference because my 9th place will be revealed a little bit later on. But for Yuki Tsunoda, I think I've said it for about 2-3 seasons now. This season is kind of make or break for Yuki Tsunoda because, in a sense, Christian Horner and Helmut Marko have already said we can't have a driver in the sister team for a numerous amount of seasons, and he's not made any progressions up. We've obviously seen Liam Lawson being given the move up into the Red Bull seat, and I think Yuki Tsunoda has been a little bit hard done by in that respect. Isaac Hadjar. With Isaac, I mean, he's had a very, very good season in Formula Two. That can't be denied. But do I see him kind of going toe to toe with Yuki Tsunoda, especially knowing how good Yuki Tsunoda can be on his day? Numerous points finishes the season just gone by. And he's obviously battled with the likes of Daniel Ricciardo. He obviously battled with who else has he had? He's had Liam Lawson in that seat. He's had Nick De Vries, and he's been able to kind of outshine most of those teammates that he's had. So I've put the RB pairing 10th. And not to say that they're a bad pairing, but I think that there's two drivers at very much opposite ends of the scale. With Yuki Tsunoda obviously trying to find a route further up the grid in Formula One, and Isaac Hadjar having his first ever season in Formula One. So I'm definitely not doing any. I'm not definitely saying that these two are likely to have a bad season. I'm just saying I think there's more exciting driver pairings on the grid than those two. But Ethan, who have you placed in number 10?
I'm quite shocked about that because I've got them a fair bit higher. In 10th, I've gone for Alpine. So you've got Pierre Gasly and Jack Doohan. The way I'm looking at this, I think there's a clear top six, and then the bottom four are quite tight, and it's about how you rank sort of the number one and number two driver. I think out of those bottom four, I rank Doohan as the worst of the number two drivers, and then I think the number one drivers are all pretty close. So that's the reason I've gone for Alpine in 10th. Obviously, Doohan's just had the one race, so it's a bit quick to judge, but I just think it's not a good sign when your own team doesn't have faith in you. Like there's already been talks about Franco Colapinto. Obviously, he's been reserve driver and he's signed a 5-year contract or something like that. You don't sign a contract like that unless you've got assurances that you will be getting a seat in the near future. So I think they're already looking to make a change, and I think if it is Franco Colapinto, then it is probably slightly different. They're probably quite a fair bit higher. But yeah, as it is, I've gone for Alpine in 10th.
And I've not gone too dissimilar to yourself. I've put Alpine in ninth, so only one place higher than what you've placed in. Um, and I entirely agree with what you've really had to say about the rookies and kind of Jack doing. Essentially, if you're looking at it, Jack Doohan, out of all of them rookies, has had probably the least amount of track time in the last 2 seasons. He's been reserve driver. He's kind of had. I don't really think he's kind of had real racing experience in the last 2 seasons ever since he stepped out of Formula Two. And if you look at the likes of Kimi Antonelli, the likes of Ollie Behrman, Gabriel Bortoleto, Isaac Hadjar, Liam Lawson, they've all kind of had race seats and have kind of been racing in their own respect. Obviously, Bortoleto, Hadjar, Behrman, and Antonelli have been driving in Formula 2, whilst Liam Lawson has been driving in Formula 1 for the last couple of races of the 2024 season. So, on the face of it, I kind of see Alpine being carried by Pierre Gasly entirely the next season. And it all depends on how quickly Jack Doohan can acclimatise into the team, because if it does take him a long time, I do see the sort of hints of Franco Colapinto and the numerous amount of reserve drivers that they've kind of acquired in the off season. I see him all being a sort of not an act, but I see Alpine kind of putting a strong standpoint and a strong viewpoint on what Jack Doohan needs to do in order to keep his race seat for 2025 and onwards, because there's going to be a hell of a lot of pressure on, and he's essentially got to kick on from the start of the season. So Alpine I've put in ninth, purely on the basis of the quality of Pierre Gasly. I think Jack Doohan's likely to play that second fiddle role, and it is all down to how he acclimatizes himself into the team. And I've put him obviously above the RB team because I see Pierre Gasly being stronger than Yuki Tsunoda and Isaac Hadjar together, which is a strong statement because he's obviously recorded podiums and a race win at RB or AlphaTauri, whatever you want to call them. But I've put them in ninth, and I solely put him there because of Pierre Gasly's quality and what he brings to the team.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that, and I think it is imperative that Jack Doohan or does hit the ground running and puts in some strong performances to start the season off. Otherwise, it could be a very short venture into Formula One for him. For me, in ninth place, I've gone for Sauber. So you got Nico Hulkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto. Obviously, I know Bortoleto is the sort of the F2 champion, but I feel like a couple of other rookies who we're going to talk about are actually stronger drivers, stronger all-round packages. Obviously, there was no way in at McLaren for him. That lineup looks set for many years, depending on how obviously the teammates work together. But as it is, I think that they do rank in ninth. Obviously, we don't need to say anything about Nico Hulkenberg. He's obviously a fantastic driver. But I think when you take it as an overall team package, I think that the second drivers for these other teams help bridge the gap between Hulkenberg and maybe a couple of others. So that's why I've gone for them in ninth.
I've got the Sauber pairing a little bit higher up. Because in number eight, I've actually gone with Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. And it may shock you, it may surprise you, but I sincerely think that Lance Stroll weighs that team down so much that they deserve to be in eighth. Fernando Alonso's quality is fantastic to see. He's obviously been dragging that team through the mud whilst Lance Stroll's been performing disaster class after disaster class. People were there to see where with how many awful ratings we gave Lance Stroll in the average driver rating, and it's clear to see that if Aston Martin can't do anything about Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso has to be there to pick up the pieces. And if Aston Martin do what they did in 2024 with the car seemingly going backwards, the driver pairing just doesn't excite me. I've with me, I've looked at this. I've looked at these 10 pairings and kind of gone with excitement. And for me, Fernando Alonso, yes, he's experienced, and yes, he's got multiple race wins and titles under his belt. But does he excite me in an Aston Martin? And does Lance Stroll excite me in an Aston Martin? I don't think they do. With that being said, I could bite my word. I could completely be wrong with Fernando Alonso, and it could, especially with Newey coming into the building, it could be an absolutely different team at Aston Martin. But I just don't think Alonso excites me anymore. He's Don't get me wrong. I think he's quite a bit past his prime. That is got to be said. But yeah, it just doesn't hit the spot. It's not the Fernando Alonso that we definitely saw at Renault and at Ferrari. It's the Fernando Alonso of old, and it pains me to say, and I'll happily take the critics on with what I've just said. But as a driver pairing, they just don't excite me. I just don't get the buzz of Aston Martin anymore. Yes, Fernando Alonso gave us the buzz in 2023, but 2024 showed us that when Fernando Alonso doesn't have that blistering car underneath him, it's just midfield kind of finishes, and it doesn't excite me. It's not that buzz. I think the younger generation are starting to take over in Formula One, and I'm excited to see the younger generation perform. But Lance Stroll just weighs that team down, and Fernando Alonso, I just don't see him obviously reaching the dizzying heights that he has done in the season prior. So I've put him down in eighth. I'm happy to have what the critics have to say to me, but yeah, I'm just not excited anymore.
I think that's an Instagram clip right there. I think that's going to get a little bit of backlash, if I'm being honest. I think that Fernando Alonso is a two-time world champion. He's one of three world champions on the grid. He's got only Verstappen and Hamilton have more race wins than him, more podiums than him. And you look at his performances from the start of the 2023 season. Needless to say, I disagree. I've got them higher, even on the back of Lance Stroll, who you're right. I don't think he's Formula One material. I think he's ran his race when he's going into his ninth season now. He's still making mistakes like he did in Brazil. But anyway, I digress. I'll get onto that at a later stage. I've gone for Haas in eighth place. Oh, this is a very, very interesting driver dynamic because you've got Esteban Ocon, the experienced one, who doesn't tend to play well with teammates. He tends to have a few issues with his teammates. You look at Sergio Perez at Force India, you look at Fernando Alonso, you look at Pierre Gasly. There's always a bit of need or a bit of bite between Esteban Ocon and his teammates, and that makes a very, very interesting dynamic when you've got sort of a young, raw talent like Ollie Behrman, who, needless to say, there's a lot of hype around him. Obviously, we can't expect every single one of his performances to be like it has been in the three races he's stood in. But it's very interesting dynamic. I think that, like I said, I view this as the top six are sort of are clear of these bottom four. And then I'm looking at the driver one and driver two combinations. Where do I rank the first driver? Where do I rank the second driver? And I think middle of the pack is about right. Because I think you've got Hulkenberg and Tsunoda who are probably edge over Ocon. But then out of these four rookies, I'd probably give the credit to Behrman because he's put in the performances on Formula One, albeit in just three races. He's got the track time. He's got that slight edge in terms of experience. So that's why I put them in eighth place.
Yeah, I'm happy to take the backlash from what I've said about Fernando Alonso, but you say from 2023, it was essentially about 2023 season that kind of when he stepped into Aston Martin, that was the season that he had all the podiums. 2024, what's he really done?
But
What's
the
he really
car's
done?
not there. The car's not there to get the
Exactly,
podiums anymore.
exactly, exactly. So you've got to hear my point. I said that for Fernando Alonso, if the car is there, he's performing it fantastically at a fantastic level. Last season, the car was not there. In Aston Martin, can you really say that Aston Martin excited you last season? Could you? Can you?
What? Yeah, well, only half the team excites me anyway, looking at Fernando Alonso. But still, some of the racing he put in last season, I think there was moments of brilliance, and I think that's what you get with Fernando Alonso. He's one of those drivers that when the car's on it, he will go above and beyond. He performs at a level not many drivers in the history of the sport can replicate with the standard of performance. And I think that he's obviously had a very, very unlucky time as of late with cars that he's driven. But he showed it in that 2023 season when the car was second, third, fourth, even fifth fastest sometimes. He was getting podiums. Like, I think about the 2023 season when Aston Martin's performance slowly faded away. Yeah, he got that unbelievable podium in Brazil fighting against Sergio Perez in the best car the sport has ever seen. That's my point, and I think it's a little bit harsh to say Fernando Alonso doesn't excite you as a Formula One driver.
No, I stand with my point. I just think he's like you mentioned there. If the car's not underneath him, he's constantly in the midfield. He's picking up points here and there. Don't get me wrong. He's a fantastic driver in his own right. But with the team and with the car that he had underneath him last season, it just wasn't that amazing standard that we know Fernando Alonso having. Like if we were talking about the driver pairings last year heading into 2024, I'd have them right up there. But because of the substandard car that they had last term heading into a new season, I'm just not really looking forward to what Aston Martin can produce. But then again, with Adrian Newey, anything could happen. Um, like I say, this is purely our opinions, and I'm happy to fight the critics on all of that. But purely on heading into a new season, I don't think Aston Martin excite me too much. Moving on to seventh place, I've actually got Sauber in seventh, so Nico Hulkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto. As a driver pairing, we obviously know the standard that Nico Hulkenberg has produced in 2024, which arguably, could you say it's better than Fernando Alonso? Could you say that the standard that Nico Hulkenberg had in 2024 was better than Fernando Alonso? And I say yes. I arguably say yes. With the amount of Q3 finishes that Nico Hulkenberg had in a car that you could say is worse than the Aston Martin. So that's why I put Nico Hulkenberg ahead of Aston Martin. And then you look at Gabriel Bortoleto. I mean, F2 champion, F3 champion in the season before that. He's heading into F1 for the first time ever, similarly to what Oscar Piastri did. And I think as a driver, he excites me a lot. It's unfortunate that obviously he's not able to drive for McLaren because um, obviously the driver pairing there is pretty much nailed on. But those two drivers, they excite me a lot. Obviously the car that they might have is likely to lack a lot. But in terms of excitement and in terms of the pairing that Sauber have, they have a fantastic, fantastic driver pairing. And a driver pairing that I think can perform should the car be underneath them. Whether the car will be underneath them, that's yet to be known. But as a driver pairing, they excite me a lot. That's why I placed them in seventh.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to have the car underneath them this season. Maybe next season. Maybe next season when they've got Audi. But yeah, that's kind of why I put them in a little bit lower down. For me in seventh, I've gone for RB. I think that Yuki Tsunoda must be absolutely raging at the fact he's not starting in a Red Bull right now. I don't know how you can look at you can compare this, what, 6 races was it? But Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda were teammates and go and say, do you know what? Liam Lawson is our man. No disrespect to him, because obviously in 2023, he done a fantastic job when he stepped in for, I think, the 6 races again. But Yuki Tsunoda since then has taken his drive to another level. You look at, since Gasly left, obviously he struggled against Gasly in the sense that he was a rookie, being in the sport for 2 years before Gasly left. Since he's left, he's given De Vries, who been waiting for 10 years for a Formula One drive. He got kicked out after 10 races. Daniel Ricciardo, he sent him back into retirement, and Liam Lawson, he's dismantled him 6-0 in qualifying last season. So I just cannot understand for the life of me why Yuki Tsunoda is not in that Red Bull. And it goes back to what you said, is it is a very important season for him, because he essentially needs to have the season of his life, because he's got to look at elsewhere other than Red Bull, because Red Bull aren't going to give him the seat. So he needs to look, right, where can I go that's going to prosper my career? Where can I go that I can get a top seat, or I can get another seat, and take my game to another level, and show people, do you know what, I'm a force to be reckoned with. And I think he's got all the talent to do that. I think he's one of those drivers. You talked about excitement in your rankings. He's one of those drivers that if they were fighting at the front of the grid, would have you on the edge of your seat, because he's so raw and so quick. But he does still have the odd mistake in him. And then Isaac Hadjar as well. I think he's a top talent. I almost think he could be viewed as a bigger talent than Bortoleto in some ways. Obviously, they went head to head for the F2 title on Abu Dhabi last season, and Bortoleto edged it there. But I still think he's a top driver, and I look forward to seeing what he can do this season. So that's why I've got them in seventh. And like I go back to, top of that mini league at the bottom.
Very, very valid points for the RB pairing there from you. On to sixth place, and closing out our kind of, like you mentioned, mini league of the bottom half of the grid. I've gone with Haas. I've gone with Esteban Ocon and Ollie Behrman. Ollie Behrman just excites you from when he stepped in Saudi Arabia for Carlos Sainz, and he performed that absolute miracle in his first outing in Formula One, because you didn't know what you really were expecting when Ollie Behrman jumped into the Ferrari in Saudi Arabia, especially when Carlos Sainz had to pull out. Was it on the Friday? I think it was, because I believe he did FP1, but then Behrman stepped into, I believe it was FP2 or FP3. I'm not 100% sure, but I know that Ollie Behrman obviously did qualifying and he did the race. Um, but in terms of excitement, I think Ollie Behrman didn't have the Formula 2 season he would have hoped he wanted in 2024. Did obviously get a couple of race wins and podiums under his belt, but was nowhere near competing for the championship title. But when he stepped into Formula One and kind of did what he needed to do, apart from maybe Brazil, where it kind of showed his inexperience in the wet weather. When he stepped in for Kevin Magnussen in Baku and for Carlos Sainz in Saudi Arabia, you just saw his talent and his pace, and both of those races saw him finishing the points. And it's no mean feat. Two races, points finishes. So it's no mean feat. And for Esteban Ocon, like you mentioned, he does like to clash with his teammate, but I maybe see him turning a corner with Ollie Behrman. I think that obviously he's got to be working as the experienced head and the kind of the team leader in Haas. And I think Ayo Komatsu will be reiterating that, I think, every race to Esteban Ocon, because he will be playing as team leader. And if Esteban Ocon can't provide that for Ollie Behrman, there's going to be a lot of clashes. But I'm hoping that's not the case, and I'm hoping I don't bite my words, because this 6 to 10 that I've kind of provided here, there's been a lot of surprises, and I hope I don't bite my words with some of these driver pairings, because those two do excite me, especially Oliver Behrman and Esteban Ocon. I hope he does turn a corner, because it is a very exciting driver pairing that Haas do have.
For me, in sixth place, I've gone for Aston Martin. I just think Fernando Alonso is a two-time world champion. Like we kind of discussed beforehand, I think on his day, there are very, very few drivers that can rival him, that can rival his level of ability and performance. So I think that in terms of that, I've got to have him higher up because of that. Obviously, we've done the driver rankings. I think Lance Stroll was like 19th or something for last season for the averages. I think only ahead of like Sergio Perez and Logan Sargent. So it tells you everything you need to know about how we rate him. But that being said, you've got to place him above the likes of Bortoletto and Hadjar and Doohan, who haven't done a race in Formula One, or Doohan's only done the one. You got to think that 8 years of experience would give you a slight advantage in that sense. So that's why I've gone for them for six. For me, I think it is quite clear. And then the top five is where it gets really interesting because they're a cut above the rest.
So, like you mentioned, let's head into the top five. And in fifth, surprise, surprise, I've gone with Red Bull, Max Verstappen and Liam Lawson in fifth. And with obviously the 4 driver pairings ahead of them, I see a lot more excitement there, and I see a lot more pizzazz. Liam Lawson, I think wrongfully in the seat at Red Bull. If Yuki Tsunoda was in that seat, I'd have him a lot higher up. But with Liam Lawson, can you really count on Liam Lawson being that second driver that Red Bull need, going alongside Max Verstappen? I don't think you can. I don't think you can. And I don't think I'm the only one saying this, but Liam Lawson will be put in his place by Max Verstappen. He's already been put in his place by Helmut Marko, saying there's no chance of him competing against Max Verstappen. And that just plainly, I think from that solely, it kind of shows that Red Bull are essentially giving Liam Lawson the middle finger treatment. Because if they're not even kind of counting on his ability to match Max Verstappen, what has the poor kid got to do to kind of be anywhere near Max Verstappen, kind of compete with him? I don't think he can. And don't get me wrong, Max Verstappen excites everyone. He's obviously won 4 world championships back to back to back to back. But I see the 4 driver pairings above Red Bull a lot more exciting. Just there's a lot more buzz and a lot more excitement with the 4 driver pairings, I think, above that. Call me Mr. Controversial, but I'm all about that, and I love making a good controversy. So I've got Red Bull in fifth.
Yeah, in fifth place, I've got Mercedes. I think that it's a very exciting lineup with Russell versus Antonelli. But I just think the four above them are clearly stronger, in my opinion. Russell's obviously shown he can go toe to toe with the greatest driver of all time, and beat him in two out of their three seasons together. And then Antonelli, who I don't think we need to do any more hyping over, because he's been phenomenal in the junior categories. There's a lot of buzz around him. Obviously, Toto Wolff is his biggest fan and probably build him a statue. Um, so yeah, I think it will be this will be a very intriguing dynamic to see how Antonelli fares up against Russell. Where this is a big season for George Russell, because he's gone and he's beat Lewis Hamilton the first couple of seasons. There wasn't a whole lot of pressure on, I don't think, because nobody expected him to beat him. But this is a very big season for George Russell because of the expectation on him. He's expected to be that team leader, and he almost needs to beat Antonelli by a big margin to keep his integrity and to keep his that credit there. So that will be intriguing to see how that plays out. But I think the four above them are just so much stronger.
On to my fourth place, and I've gone just a place above you. I've gone with fourth, the Mercedes pairing of George Russell and Kimi Antonelli. Like you mentioned there, this is similar to what I said about Yuki Tsunoda. This is a big, big season for George Russell because he's playing. He is essentially following in footsteps of Lewis Hamilton. He's going to be playing team leader for the first time since I don't want to say Williams days because when he was at Williams, he obviously had a couple of teammates that he was kind of. I don't want to put him on par because the Williams car back then was atrocious, but he was essentially starting out in Formula One and finding his feet in the sport with teammates like Nicholas Latifi and Robert Kubica. So at Williams, I wouldn't say he was playing team leader at all. But this season is essentially his first season where he is playing the big man role as the team leader because with Kimi Antonelli, there is a lot of raw talent in him. I think he's still is he still 17 or has he just turned 18? He's 18 now. So there's a lot of raw talent in Kimi Antonelli. And his Formula 2 season, I wouldn't say it was a bad one. I think it was a lot better than Ollie Behrman's because of some of the commitments that Ollie Behrman had in Formula 1. But for his first season, especially in Formula 2, having skipped Formula 3 entirely, I think it's a very good season for him. But there seems to be that massive amount of hype behind Kimi Antonelli being the next, can we say, Ayrton Senna in a sense, because of kind of that longish hair and obviously the kind of background that he brings, being a karting champion and making numerous steps into F1 and jumping into Formula One at such a young age of 18. So it's definitely not a make or break season for Kimi Antonelli. It's probably going to be he's going to have a similar season to what it is for Gabriel Bortoleto and Ollie Behrman, as kind of maybe a little stress free season for him instead of what Jack Doohan will be going through. That's for sure. But for George Russell, it is a huge, huge season. And like you mentioned, I think he does have to beat Kimi Antonelli by a massive margin to kind of put his own stamp into Mercedes and show that he is the right man to kind of lead them forward and be the team leader that they need after the departure of Lewis Hamilton. But I've gone with the pairing of George Russell and Kimi Antonelli in fourth. They're an exciting pairing, but a pairing that kind of has a lot of weight on their shoulders, that's for sure.
Yeah, like you said about George Russell, especially when you consider the fact that, Toto Wolff last season was publicly bigging up Antonelli and Max Verstappen, almost making it out as if that's his dream lineup. When you've got George Russell, who a couple of years ago was the guy that was talked about in that fashion. Moving on to fourth place for me, though, is Williams of Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon. And now I just can't understand the fact that Carlos Sainz is racing in a Williams, especially when you consider that you got Liam Lawson in that Red Bull, who, all due respect to Liam Lawson, but he's not Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz has got, what, 4 race wins in the sport, countless podiums. And he's shown himself to be a real team player. He betters every single team that he races for. Every single team when he's left is in a better place than when they started. You look at Toro Rosso, you look at Renault, you look at McLaren, you look at Ferrari. They have all moved forward in the Constructors' Championship due to him being at the team. He's an unbelievable driver. He is a personal favourite of mine, and I think that he's got a lot to offer. And I know James Vowles hasn't really been talking up about 2025 for Williams, but he has been for 2026. And I think that is the priority. But still, for someone like Carlos Sainz, he'll want to hit the ground running, or want to have a good season this year, to sort of stamp his authority on it and just kind of say, don't forget about me. I might be fighting towards the back of the grid, but I'm still a top driver, and he's one of the best drivers. And I think there's only two drivers that could have taken his spot at Ferrari, and I think they're Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. And it's like he said in interviews, he kind of understands it a little bit more because it's Lewis Hamilton, whereas he would have a harder time if it was anybody else. And I echo that. So he's a top driver, and then that's not even talking about Alex Albon, who has proven himself to be a very, very good driver, and he's gone from strength to strength for that Williams team. So it'll be interesting to see Alex Albon against a top teammate, because we've looked at Latifi and Sargent, and they've not really given him the test, whereas Carlos Sainz will give him really good tests. So you'll see the actual level that Alex Albon's driving at.
And third place for myself on the podium is obviously the pairing that you've just described, of Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon. I'm still a little bit butthurt that Carlos Sainz has departed Ferrari and has kind of joined Williams, because what a driver he's been for Ferrari. Countless podiums, countless victories, and even when the doom and gloom kind of shone over my favourite driver, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz was there to pick up the pieces. And I think that's what I'll miss the most about not seeing Carlos Sainz in a top car, because, like you've mentioned, he's taken every team he's been at from strength to strength. He obviously took Toro Rosso up a notch, he took Renault up a notch, he took McLaren up a notch, and he took Ferrari to second place in the Constructors alongside Charles Leclerc. So can Williams do it? Can Williams win Constructors' Championship in 25 or 26 when he departs from the team? Who knows? But I am slightly butthurt still that Carlos Sainz has left. Don't get me wrong. For me, seeing Lewis Hamilton, a 7-time world champion, join my team Ferrari is a blessing in disguise, I feel. But Carlos Sainz just gave us so many countless memories in that red car, that I'll have with me forever. And especially him forming that kind of C-squared partnership with Charles Leclerc. The camaraderie that those two had was one that I think Leclerc will kind of miss in the years to come. And he'll kind of have fond memories of the partnership that he did have with Carlos Sainz. But moving on to Alex Albon, you did mention that he's proven himself to be a top driver. 2024 wasn't his best season. I mean, near the back end of that season, we saw countless crash after countless crash. But that is to say, obviously, Williams had a massive rebuild job most weekends with their cars, and the amount of damage that whether it was Logan Sargent, whether it was Franco Colapinto, whether it was Alex Albon, the amount of damage and with the amount of cost that those three drivers put the team under wasn't beneficial at all, and it wasn't anything that Williams would have imagined their kind of bill of damages. The bill that they created those three drivers from the amount of crashes that they had in the season is definitely something Williams wouldn't have imagined to have. But with that being said, I think Alex Albon is due to have a bit of a better season in 2025. I think, like you mentioned, James Vowles has essentially written off 2025 and he's looking more forward until to 2026. But that's not to say that Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz can't perform miracles in that Williams car. I think it's it's a lot of raw machinery that Williams car has because with most races where straight line speed is imperative, they have it down to a T. But when it's a more downforce driven circuit, they seem to be lacking a little bit. But I think as a driver pairing, they're a very, very exciting one and one that certainly warrants a place in anybody's top five for this season and definitely my top three for 2025.
Making it onto the podium for me is Red Bull in third place. I think Max Verstappen is so astronomically clear of every other driver in the sport at this point. He is, without a doubt, the best on the grid. Four on the bounce. He's won at Red Bull. But I think it's Liam Lawson that does slightly drag it down, which it'll be interesting to see how Liam Lawson does. Obviously, we've spoken about Yuki Tsunoda, who might feel a bit hard done by. But I think that Liam Lawson is a driver with a lot of potential. There was a reason he was given the opportunity, and he's taken it with both hands, particularly in 2023, as we've discussed. But if they had someone a bit closer to Verstappen's level, I think they'll be higher up. I'm going to say this right now: if Red Bull even have the second quickest car, then Max Verstappen wins this title. It would have to be Red Bull only have the third or even fourth quickest car for someone to displace Verstappen, which will be a very, very hard task. So I think that because of that, Verstappen has got to be the favourite for the title. But it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic works with Liam Lawson, whether he can put in a better effort than Sergio Perez done. You've got to say it is an upgrade, and there's a high yield almost in terms of this working out this risk because Liam Lawson is such a talented driver. He's done so well in the junior formulas. He's had to bide his time, and he's finally got that seat. He's done a good job in the RB, but Tsunoda done a better job, obviously. And then he's got this opportunity, so he needs to take it.
On to number two, just missing out on top spot. And I think both of us will have these two. Do you want to say it on three? 1, 2, 3. McLaren.
Ferrari. No, I'm only
Wow.
joking. It's McLaren in two. It's the McLaren at number two for me.
I was about to say, if I knew, because obviously for this season, if nobody knows, Charles Leclerc is my favourite. Lewis Hamilton is Ethan's favourite. Oh, wait, we're on the same team. So obviously they're going to be number one. But let's talk about Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. Obviously, Constructors Champions in 2024. But you know what? I see a lot. I think this season there's going to be a lot of hostility in that McLaren team. And hear me out why. I think both of those drivers are number one quality. And I think, especially with the talent that Oscar Piastri possesses and the talent that Lando Norris possesses, both of those drivers aren't going to be happy with whoever's going to be having preferential treatment, if you get what I mean. In 2024, it was Lando Norris with a preferential treatment, and we saw why when he was fighting in loose quotation marks for the title. But with Oscar Piastri, is he going to be happy with how things are going to be if it stays like this? Oscar, I think, deserves more, and I think everybody well knows that Oscar Piastri deserves more because with the amount of talent that he's got, obviously coming through the ranks, winning Formula 3 and then Formula 2, and then jumping into Formula 1, heading into his third season at the team, he's going to be wanting to battle at the front of the grid, and he's wanting to obviously be a world champion. Everybody wants to be a world champion. But if the team can't provide that, what does he do? What are his options? And what does he have to do to displace Lando Norris? from being that number one driver in loose quotation marks, but because I think McLaren don't have that number one driver, and I think even if they did have that number one driver, I don't think they'd disclose it purely because of the amount of feistiness and the kind of words that would be exchanged between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. Lando Norris has obviously been there since kind of the start. He's come through the junior formulas, he's jumped into Formula One, and he's been there since the start at McLaren. Oscar Piastri was obviously Alpine before they announced him as their driver. He decided not they didn't want anything to do with it, jumped to McLaren, and it was probably the best decision that he made. But I think there's going to be a lot of hostility and a lot of feistiness in that team in 2025. Whether that's a good thing, I don't know. But there's two drivers that have got an abundance of talent, an abundance of podiums and race victories last season that can back up their talent, and they're hoping that that kind of form from 2024 can translate into 2025 and they can have an even more successful season. But whether they continue to work it out together and whether Oscar or Lando will be happy with what's been said by the higher ups, I don't know. But I do see a lot of feistiness and a lot of hostility in that team in 2025. And whether that's a good thing, I don't know.
Yeah, I do echo what you said. For McLaren, obviously, I've got them in number two as well. I think that it'll be interesting to see how Oscar Piastri does on a level playing field against Lando Norris, because obviously for the first half of the season there'll be no team order, no nothing like that, and he has every opportunity to cement himself as the first driver, the number one driver. It could be the case that Lando Norris's chance has been and gone with that season. Obviously, McLaren must go into this season as the favourites. They must do. The way they've the trajectory of that team over the last 2 years has been brilliant. They're comfortably the quickest car on the grid. Whether Red Bull and Ferrari can make up the difference is remains to be seen. But the mechanics at McLaren have done a fantastic job. I think people have Oscar Piastri. They've put him in the wrong light. They kind of think because he's a bit introverted, because he's a bit keeps himself to himself a bit, that he is a bit of a pushover and he's happy to play the team game. I don't think that's true at all. I think he is fiercely competitive and he is going to do everything he can to become a world champion, and rightly so. Because he has all the talent to do that. He has the talent to become multiple world champion. And his evolution over his 2 years in Formula One has been very, very good. You look at the tyre management, which has been the big thing for him, has got a lot better, particularly in the middle of last season when he was comfortably winning those two races in Hungary and Baku. And then for Lando Norris, he almost needs to use 2024 as a learning curve. There's two ways this can play out. It can play out in bad sense that it lets him get it down and it affects his performances moving forward. Or he can think, you know what, can't do anything about that now. Got some very, very valuable experience though, and it can be the making of him as a Formula One driver, and he can really go from strength to strength. So that will be interesting to see how he bounces back this season. But I have them in number two for obvious reasons.
And on to number one. Who else could it be but the most exciting driver pairing on the grid next season? It is our team, Ethan's team, my team, the GOATs, Ferrari. And it puts a smile on my face because finally me and Ethan will not be in constant disagreement. We will be one happy family at Ferrari. Him supporting Lewis Hamilton and myself supporting Charles Leclerc, but together they are both Ferrari. And I'm sure that everybody's seen the kind of the Godfather picture that Lewis Hamilton posted on Instagram from his first day at Ferrari, and even seeing him in that red suit, it's just wow. Well, even seeing that him putting on that yellow helmet, oh, just different gravy. I'm not going to say a lot because I think the driver pairings speak for themselves. Lewis Hamilton, multiple world champion, over 100 race victories, multiple pole positions. Oh, like the records say it's for himself. It's there. Charles Leclerc, obviously also a multiple race winner, could have been a world champion in his own right when he was fighting Max Verstappen in 22, I believe it was. And can the, can this see? Yeah, Ethan showed me fighting in loose quotation marks. It's similar to the Lando Norris situation. Okay, I'll put it right out there. Um, but those two, it's just different gravy. I'm hoping that it's not going to be what is happening at kind of McLaren, and kind of the two egos collide and kind of create a lot of hostility and a lot of beef behind the scene. But I'm hoping that the two work together well, and can bring many titles to Ferrari in the years to come. But as a driver pairing, delicious, exciting, number one.
Yeah, absolutely echo everything you said. I was thinking beforehand when after we done the our preseason predictions, our 1 to 20, I was thinking, do you know what, next year I'm gonna go a bit safer. I'm gonna try and take the emotion out of it, go Lewis Hamilton maybe a little bit lower, maybe fourth or fifth, to sort of go with the highest odds percentage. And then I saw him stood outside Enzo Ferrari's house in that suit. And then I saw him in the Ferrari race suit and then that yellow helmet and then racing around the track. And I just thought all of that went out the window. And now I am absolutely convinced that number 8 is coming. Absolutely. This will be such an interesting partnership to see. Obviously, you've got two of the best 3 or 4 drivers on the grid right now, in Leclerc and Hamilton. This comes at a stage where Leclerc has grown from strength to strength, like you said in 2022, when he had that what looked to be a championship battle, but after about the halfway point, it was dead and buried. I think the one that sticks out is Spa, when you had like they lined up next to each other, and before the halfway point, Verstappen was in the lead. It'll be so interesting to see how this plays out and moves forward. I think this could work in 2 ways. It could hinder Ferrari because they're taking points of each other, or it can take it to a whole nother level and they can go from strength to strength, and one of them could win the championship. That's who my money would be on. If I was to put up money on it, it'll be a Ferrari driver that wins the championship. But that might be a bit of emotion, a bit of bias talking. But yeah, it's without a doubt the most exciting partnership on the grid.
Well, at least this season coming, we both will be talking with a lot of emotion and a lot of bias towards our team Ferrari. But if you can't beat them, join them. So welcome on board, Ethan. But now let's just to round off this episode, let's go back through and give our rankings so everybody knows who we've gone for. So we'll start from 10 to 1 and we'll quickly fire them off. So in 10th, I went for Yuki Tsunoda and Isaac Hadjar at RB. In 9th, I went with Pierre Gasly and Jack Doohan at Alpine. In 8th, controversially, I went with Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll at Aston Martin. In 7th, the Sauber pairing of Nico Hulkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto. In 6th, Esteban Ocon and Ollie Behrman at Haas. 5th, controversially again, you could say, Max Verstappen and Liam Lawson at Red Bull. In 4th, the Mercedes duo of George Russell and Kimi Antonelli. In 3rd, the Williams pairing of Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz. In 2nd, the papaya pairing at McLaren of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. And in 1st place, no doubt in anybody's mind, was the pairing of Ferrari, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton.
For me, I went for Alpine in 10th with Pierre Gasly and Jack Doohan. 9th, I went for Sauber with Nico Hulkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto. And in 8th, I went for Haas's Esteban Ocon and Ollie Behrman. 7th, I went for RB with Yuki Tsunoda and Isaac Hadjar. 6th, Aston Martin with Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. 5th, I went for Mercedes of George Russell and Kimi Antonelli. 4th, the Williams pairing of Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon. 3rd, Red Bull's Verstappen and Liam Lawson. And then runners up, I went for Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri at McLaren. And then obviously again, I went for Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc at Ferrari in 1st place.
So that rounds off episode 3 of On the Grid podcast. That rounds off the episode of us ranking the 2025 F1 driver pairings on the grid next season. We'll be back next week, where we'll be looking at some news bits, factoring some first days, wink, wink, Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari, and looking just back, looking through the backlog of news that we've not covered in the episodes prior to the obviously recording of this pre-recording episodes fiasco and the time that we've had before pre-season gets underway. But thank you for joining us. Like I mentioned, we'll be back very, very soon with another episode. In the meantime, keep listening, keep streaming all our episodes, keep the engagement going. Like I said, we'll see you very, very shortly. Goodbye.